with our three invited guest speakers, and each of them are going to summarize and make comments about what they've done, and then we're going to open up the floor for discussion. So please feel free to interact. And we're going to begin with Diana.
Thank you. Yes, I've got an 8-page paper that is posted on the site if anyone wants to check a formal working through of some of the new directions I think that the kind of project like we're involved in here could take to move forward. But I'm only going to speak very briefly today about some of those ideas. I did want to note that there was a Brazil-Canada Framework Agreement announcement made on August 18th, 2010, which is designed to strengthen the binational relationship between our countries in the science and technology sectors. And I think there's a lot of room here for advancing work within the overlapping fields of digital, transnational, and cross-cultural literacy research, including work on the changing functions of English in local and global contexts and on the World Wide Web. There's a huge contribution this group can make in this area. There's a lot of interest at the national level now as well as the global level. And the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada has also just about a week or two ago announced new grants for developing partnership research in this kind of area, including international partnerships. So I think that we should be thinking, how can we build on the kind of work that we're doing here? And if we were able to get a little more funding, what kinds of things would we like to accomplish? One thing that I thought worked extremely well this morning was having a translator for those of us who are only beginning to learn Portuguese. And we were able to hear then, through translation, some brilliant papers and question and answer session delivered in Portuguese. And I think that what I've heard in those papers this morning and what I've heard over the last 2 days from your contributions is that we are developing together new modes of cross-cultural interaction, of interpretation, and of translation across various kinds of difference, including differences in language. I have a whole summary sheet here around the various tensions in play between globalization and higher education. But again, I have papers posted on the web elaborating these questions. The few points that I would like to make based on my perspective of the issues we're addressing is first of all that knowledge is not information. Teaching is not learning. They're different activities, and it's important to distinguish between them. The learning, research, engagement continuum is changing, and the creative, critical continuum is also blurring. So I think we've begun to talk about a lot of these dimensions today. I think that this project is extremely strong in the work it's doing in trying to collect data on what's actually happening in classrooms across the nation now and in the area of teacher training. And I think that there's a lot of energy already being put into place in the kinds of changes in practices that may need to be necessary, and some thinking about policy and possible policy changes beginning to develop. I think it would also be useful, and I know many of you have begun to do this already, is to think about the contributions that your work can make to changes in theory and to changes in theorizing understanding. And I see several areas where you're already making important theoretical contributions that maybe just need to be pulled together and made more clearly. One is in the area of interdisciplinarity. What does it mean to work across disciplines? How can you make interdisciplinarity work? there still has been a slight tendency, I think, for sessions devoted to language maybe to be in one area and sessions devoted to literature being in a separate session, although the session I heard this morning combined the two and it was wonderful. So think about theories of interdisciplinarity, bringing practice and theory together. I think also the question of what is the difference between a network and a community. I have a really interesting slide posted in the talk that I won't bother showing you, but it's from a very interesting paper that recently came out this year by a woman named Wilson called Technology, Networks, and Communities, where she begins to outline some of the differences between the two while also recognizing that the relationship of them is changing and even the definition of them is changing. And in fact, virtual and real communities are changing each other, influencing each other. I shouldn't have said real, I should have said virtual and actual. That was a binary that one of the papers I heard this morning challenged in very interesting theoretical ways. So I think we do need to think about the tendency still, in some ways, to privilege one of these apparent binaries over the other, whether you privilege the virtual or whether you privilege the actual. But in fact, you can't separate them as easily as you might think. They are co-producing each other nowadays. The other area was the ways in which specific groups may find themselves enabled or disabled by access to new technologies. And I had a chart talking about how diasporic communities, how diaspora are using digital networks to reform community. But this morning I heard a wonderful paper talking about the issue of the visually impaired and how new technologies, again, could be adapted to change our very definition of who we are and how we work together and become very, very enabling for social inclusion. The next issue I wanted to mention briefly was I just came from India, where I was part of a session on learning for global democracy, and that conference came up with 15 items that they felt were not necessarily consensus items because it involved 60 people from around the world working in many different languages and working in grassroots organizations, policy organizations, as well as academia. But we did come up with these 15 general principles. They're not publicly available yet. I was going to share them to you in process, the third version that we have. Again, it's posted on the paper, and if you have questions, I could bring up some of them in discussion. It will be on the web probably in a month or two after everyone buys into the articulation that we have produced. Two more points. In 2010, the president of the Modern Language Association published her presidential address. And the title of that address was, "English is Not Enough." And I think that signals a really important shift in direction in the literature and language communities globally, and certainly in the Americas as well. Much more attention is now being paid to multilingualism and translation. So again, you are ahead of the curve, but the rest of the world is beginning to catch up with us. Finally, there's another recent article that just came out that I thought was very interesting summary of critical literacy studies to date by a woman named Kathy Mills, and the bibliography is posted on the web. So she summarizes how she sees critical literacy studies to date, but then she also makes two recommendations that she thinks the field should consider moving forward. And these two recommendations are, one, there is scope for new literacy studies to reform conventional measures of literacy by generating, implementing, refining, and disseminating innovative models of digital and multimodal literacy assessments for new times. And that's what you're doing already, but it's interesting to see it's being prescribed. Secondly,